They thought it was just another trial, until Keanu Reeves tapped his finger and his dog growled. Seconds later, the judge froze mid-sentence. What did the dog sense, and why did it stop the entire courtroom? What Keanu knew could unravel everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was the kind of gray morning that wrapped Washington, D.C. in a quiet, reluctant stillness, the kind that whispered that something was coming. Inside the towering marble halls of the federal courthouse, security was tight. Uniformed officers flanked the entrance, their expressions unreadable, their eyes scanning everything and everyone. But even among senators, intelligence analysts, and news anchors crowding the lobby, one figure drew silent attention without saying a word: Keanu Reeves. He moved through the doors without a single camera flash. No press agents, no sunglasses, no entourage. Just him, a lean figure dressed in black with a quiet energy that silenced small talk around him. At his side trotted a powerful Belgian Malinois, the dog's gait disciplined, precise, but his body bore the memory of violence. A long, visible scar ran down his left flank, patchy fur failing to cover it. His name was Atlas. To the public, this was just an actor attending a public hearing. But behind the courtroom doors, only a few people knew the truth. Keanu Reeves had been invited by federal security for something far more serious than appearances. Years ago, during an incident that never made the news, Keanu had helped recover a stolen intelligence drive during a private humanitarian trip in Eastern Europe. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't involve fighting. It involved patience, observation, and a calm mind under pressure. That quiet bravery caught the attention of a few powerful people. And now, when the stakes were high and discretion was critical, they called on him again. Keanu's official title for the day was Civilian Security Liaison, a technical term, but his role was simple: observe, not speak, not intervene, just watch the handling of classified evidence to ensure that no detail went unnoticed. He was a presence, not a participant. The defendant, Thomas Granger, once a low-profile intelligence officer with access to communications systems embedded deep in allied governments, now accused of selling encrypted state secrets to a foreign adversary. Allegedly, Granger had used his clearance to pass critical information on troop movements and cyber infrastructure to an unnamed foreign power. He claimed innocence. No recordings, no direct evidence, just surveillance anomalies, and one intercepted call with a scrambled voice that mentioned him by name. But the stakes couldn't be higher. If he was guilty, dozens of American agents could already be compromised. If he was innocent, the real traitor was still out there. Either way, this trial wasn't just about Granger. It was about trust in the entire intelligence community. Inside the courtroom, a cool hush settled as the doors closed and the bailiff called the room to order. Rows of suits shifted uneasily. The press had been excluded. No public stream. Only authorized attendees and witnesses. Keanu entered quietly through the side door and took a seat in the front row, just behind the prosecution's table. Atlas lay at his feet, his head resting across Keanu's boots like he'd done it 100 times before. But his eyes were alert, watching. Judge Helen Marsh, a sharp and seasoned federal judge known for her tough courtroom demeanor, adjusted her robe and peered over the top of her glasses. Let the record show, this trial involves active national security interests. All classified content is under strict handling protocol. Across the courtroom, Thomas Granger sat flanked by his two attorneys. His suit was flawless, hair immaculately combed, hands folded. He didn't look like a traitor. He looked like a man who'd never been caught doing anything wrong in his life. But something about the way he scanned the room, eyes darting briefly to Atlas, gave Keanu pause. No one else seemed to notice. Atlas, too, remained still, but Keanu had learned long ago that the dog didn't need to move to be reading everything. He had been trained in military-grade detection devices, chemicals, behavioral irregularities. Atlas had once identified an explosives cache buried beneath a school playground by detecting a shift in scent so small it wouldn't have registered to any machine. He'd been injured during a raid, caught in the blast of a tripwire drone, but survived, just barely. Most dogs would have been retired. Atlas, however, had been reconditioned by a specialist team and reassigned to low-intensity detection roles. Quiet rooms, controlled environments, like this one. Keanu reached down, gently resting a hand on Atlas's back. No words, just that familiar contact. Atlas didn't flinch. The opening statements began. "Your Honor," the lead prosecutor, Marcia Klein, stood tall and assertive. "This case will show that Mr. Granger didn't simply mishandle information. He chose to betray it. The evidence, though subtle, will align through behavioral tells, encrypted transmissions, and financial trails that lead back to one man." Thomas Granger sat unmoved. The defense opened with fire. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are not here to try imagination. We are here to examine facts. And there are none. No footage, no voice recognition, no confession. Just fear, paranoia, and guesswork." Keanu remained still, but his mind was tracking everything. The words, the posture, the tone, even the rhythm of breath. Not just of Granger, but the agents, the lawyers, the judge. And through it all, Atlas's ears flicked every so often, left, then right. This trial, Keanu knew, wouldn't end with testimony alone. It would end with something no one in this courtroom saw coming. The morning sun filtered dimly through the high windows of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., casting narrow shafts of light across the polished floor. The weight of national security hung in the air like invisible armor. Everyone present knew this wasn't just another trial, it was a reckoning. Thomas Granger, the accused, sat at the defense table in a finely tailored gray suit. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, his expression eerily calm. A former intelligence officer with decades of clean service, he now stood accused of leaking classified military infrastructure plans to a hostile foreign power. Yet, despite the seriousness of the charges, Granger looked almost relaxed. Too relaxed. On the prosecution side, federal attorney Mara Cates stood behind her stack of binders, voice unwavering but with undertones of frustration. The evidence was thin: an encrypted phone, vague travel logs, one whistleblower with a recanted statement. Granger's defense team had already called holes in every claim. The media called it a hopeless case. What no one counted on was a man in black and a dog with scars. Keanu Reeves sat in the front row, not as a celebrity but as a federal security liaison. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet duty. His face bore the focus of a man who had seen too much to be easily shaken. Dressed simply in black slacks and a fitted blazer, he blended in with the agents and aides around him. At his feet lay Atlas, a large Belgian Malinois with a jagged scar across his left flank, visible even through the dark brown fur. The dog was still, eyes open, ears relaxed, watching. Keanu hadn't spoken a word since the trial began. That wasn't his role. He'd been called in not to testify, but to oversee the classified materials presented during the case. Years ago, he had helped intercept a mole in a similar espionage case, an operation that never made headlines, one that had left him injured and earned him a quiet medal. His presence here was part formality, part silent insurance. Justice Wallace presided, an imposing figure with sharp features and a reputation for his razor intuition. He watched every word, every breath, every twitch in the courtroom, and when Granger leaned back casually in his chair, listening to a document listing critical naval coordinates, Justice Wallace's gaze flicked toward Keanu, almost instinctively. Keanu saw it too. It was subtle, a tiny shift in Granger's eyes, a twitch of the lip. Most would have missed it, but Keanu had learned long ago how to read a liar's tell. He leaned forward slightly, tapped two fingers against the wood grain of the gallery's bench. Pause, then a third. To anyone else, it was nothing, but to Atlas, it was everything. The dog's ears shot up, his body stiffened, his golden eyes locked onto Granger like a laser sight. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated in Atlas's chest. His muscles coiled like a spring, but he didn't lunge. He just inched forward, alert, watching. Wait. The energy in the room shifted in an instant. Justice Wallace sat up straighter, eyes narrowing at the sudden change in the air. He wasn't a man to entertain theatrics, but he'd authorized Atlas's presence for a reason. Atlas wasn't a comfort dog. He was a government-trained detection animal with a classified background, injured in a sting operation that saved a group of federal agents, retired until Keanu requested him specifically. Cates had paused mid-sentence, blinking at the dog's sudden tension. Granger froze. For the first time, the smugness cracked. Then, without raising his voice, Justice Wallace spoke. "Recess. 15 minutes. Clear the room. Now." The clerk's voice rang out immediately, repeating the order. Confused murmurs rose as reporters gathered their notepads and attorneys scrambled to cover their documents. Granger's lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Granger didn't respond. He just stared at Atlas. Who hadn't moved? Keanu stood slowly, his hand brushing Atlas's back in a wordless command. The dog didn't need a leash. He never did. Outside the courtroom, in a quiet hallway lined with marble columns, Keanu and Atlas waited. Justice Wallace had remained inside with the bailiff. No one questioned him. Agent Olivia Brandt, head of federal court security, approached Keanu with caution. "What happened?" Keanu said nothing for a beat. Then, Atlas reacted. "That's not protocol." "It wasn't a false read," he said, voice low. "It wasn't nerves, it wasn't coincidence. Something set him off, and I think Granger felt it too." Brandt exhaled, turning to glance at the closed courtroom doors. "What do you think he picked up on?" Keanu shook his head. "Something in the cadence, in the rhythm of that document readout. Atlas doesn't respond to emotion, he responds to threat patterns, audio signals, subharmonics, body language." He paused. "And I saw it." Granger's mask cracked. Just for a second. Back inside, Justice Wallace sat silently, reviewing the courtroom footage frame by frame on the screen at the clerk's station. He watched Granger's eyes, his breath rate, the moment the dog's posture changed. Then, he paused the video. Right at the moment, Atlas began to growl. He stared. Then he picked up the courtroom phone. By the time the recess ended, a quiet storm had begun brewing behind the scenes. Keanu re-entered the courtroom with Atlas by his side. No word spoken, no change in pace, but the room no longer buzzed with confidence. Cates looked sharper, Granger looked less sure, and Justice Wallace? He didn't look up from his bench for a full minute. When he finally did, he gave a single nod to Keanu. Only they knew. Only Atlas understood. Something invisible had shifted, and the truth was no longer out of reach. The hallway outside the courtroom hummed with restrained chaos. Prosecutors whispered in tight circles, security officers paced with renewed urgency, and agents gathered around their communication devices. But in the middle of the noise, Keanu Reeves stood still. His hands clasped gently behind his back. The leash of Atlas wound loosely around his palm. Atlas, the scarred Belgian Malinois at his side, didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the now shut courtroom doors, posture taut, nose twitching faintly. He was alert but calm. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. He already knew what Atlas had sensed. A soft voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Reeves," said a tall man with a military bearing and a judge's robe draped like a flag. "Justice Wallace." His sharp features betrayed little emotion, but his eyes held the weight of experience. "Step into chambers, please." Inside the quiet office, the door clicked shut behind them. Justice Wallace didn't waste time. "That dog of yours, he saw something. You signaled him. Tell me what you know." Keanu gave a slight nod. "He didn't react to the defendant," he said quietly. "He reacted to something beneath him, not scent. Vibration, maybe? Radiation, something? Off." Wallace leaned back. He had once served in the military legal corps and had presided over high-profile trials involving national security. He understood the value of instinct, but it was rare to see it manifest with such chilling precision. "Tell me about the dog," Wallace said. Keanu glanced down at Atlas, who now lay beside his feet, head upright, ears alert. 3 years ago, Atlas was nearly killed in a raid in Syria. He took shrapnel to the leg and shoulder, was written off as unfit for service, but I saw something in him. Not brokenness, stillness. Like mine. Justice Wallace said nothing, letting Keanu continue. "I spent 6 months working with him. Rehabilitation, retraining, no voice commands, just signals, pressure, light, pattern." Keanu's hand moved subtly, tapping his index and middle fingers together. Twice, pause, once more. Atlas shifted slightly, responding without hesitation. He was trained to detect not just explosives or electronics, but patterns of movement, radiation anomalies. He's more sensitive than any instrument. Wallace exhaled slowly. "I trust your judgment. We'll sweep the courtroom." What followed was swift, quiet, and surgical. The room was cleared again. Agents from the Department of Homeland Security, working under the direction of the judge, moved in with detection equipment. It took 15 minutes. And then they found it. Beneath the table, where defendant Thomas Granger had sat with such confidence. Bolted beneath the underside, a signal device, no larger than a matchbox, coated in black carbon fiber casing, hidden behind a decorative wood lip where no one would have thought to look. When it was pried loose, a faint red light flickered inside. It was transmitting. The courtroom had been compromised. Back in the hallway, Keanu knelt beside Atlas, his hand pressed gently into the thick fur just behind the dog's ears. Atlas leaned in, not needing praise, just presence. A security tech emerged from the courtroom, face pale. "It's real," he said. "A high-frequency burst-capable transmitter, short-range encryption. It was beaming information somewhere within a 5-mile radius. Audio, possibly visual. It was capturing everything." Wallace turned to Keanu. "If your dog hadn't caught it." Keanu only nodded once. He did. The tech stepped closer. "That kind of tech isn't black market. That's government-level espionage. Someone inside the courtroom was relaying classified information, real time. And now they had to ask the question no one wanted to ask. Was Granger working alone? Wallace ordered a full security lockdown. Devices were confiscated, metal detectors rechecked, and security cameras were reviewed. Still, the device's presence remained an anomaly, undetected until a dog, written off by the system, had felt its hum. As agents worked, Keanu stood with Atlas by his side, silent but watchful. It wasn't just that the device had been found. It was that it had been planted with such precision, such intent. Whoever did this knew how to mask their tracks. And yet there had been one mistake. Keanu remembered it clearly now. Granger's face, smooth, smug, cold, had flickered when the prosecutor mentioned a certain operation, Project Overwatch, a term so classified it wasn't even listed in the files submitted to court. The term had slipped, but Granger reacted, not in panic, but in anticipation. Atlas had caught that flicker. The dog didn't understand the words, but he felt the shift in energy, in posture, in breath. His ears twitched, his spine straightened, and his muscles tightened. And when Keanu gave the signal, Atlas confirmed what instinct already knew. In the corner of the hallway, a young agent approached, tablet in hand. "Mr. Reeves," he said nervously. "Sir, the signal from the device. Our logs show it was pinging off a parked vehicle outside the courthouse." Wallace turned sharply. "Vehicle ID?" The agent nodded. "Already flagged it. Diplomatic plates. Belongs to the foreign embassy of an unnamed Eastern European nation. There it was, the link. Wallace's jaw clenched. Granger's not just a leaker, he said. He's an operative, maybe even a handler. That device was meant to capture the prosecution's case before it could be sealed. He wanted to know what we knew. Keanu glanced at the courtroom doors again. Then, we don't show him. Meaning, Wallace asked. We proceed as if we found nothing. No alarms, no disruption. Let him think he's still ahead, Keanu said. His voice was low, methodical. Wallace considered it. We use him to expose whoever else is out there. Keanu nodded, and Atlas will know if he lies. The judge gave a grim smile. Then tomorrow, the courtroom becomes a trap. That night, Keanu didn't return to his hotel. Instead, he stayed at the secure facility where Atlas was housed, a converted intelligence safe house turned detection training center. It was quiet, cold, familiar. He sat on the floor beside the dog, staring at the concrete wall. You felt it before I did, he murmured. Atlas didn't respond. He didn't have to. Keanu leaned back, thinking about the mission that nearly killed Atlas. A raid on a compound in northern Syria. The explosion. The injuries. How they'd both been written off. Forgotten. Left behind by a system that moves on too quickly. And yet, here they were. Keanu ran his fingers through the thick fur of Atlas's back, tracing the scar that ran from shoulder to flank. You saw through him, just like you saw through me. Tomorrow would be harder. Granger would be tested, and if he faltered, even slightly, Atlas would catch it, and Keanu would be watching. The courtroom would reopen, the case would resume. But everything had changed, and no one but a dog and a quiet man in black knew the full truth. Yet, the device lay dismantled on a stainless steel table, its casing pried open with surgical precision. Thin wires ran from it into a portable analyzer where lines of code scrolled in silence. Keanu stood over the tech unit, eyes fixed on the screen, arms crossed over his chest. Beside him, Atlas sat calmly but tense, his breathing shallow, nostrils flaring faintly, reading the energy in the room like static in the air. Keanu wasn't just observing. He knew this equipment. He had once built some of it, years ago, in another life, long before Hollywood, before the silence, before the scar on Atlas's shoulder, before the names he no longer mentioned. Signals encrypted, one of the younger techs said, adjusting his glasses. Tight. We're talking military grade. He looked at Keanu, almost apologetically. We're working on brute force decryption, but it's going to take... Keanu interrupted, his voice quiet but certain. Open the waveform panel. The tech blinked. Excuse me? Keanu stepped forward. Not the data layer, the transmission pattern. Open the waveform. Another tech nearby did as he said. A spectrum visual appeared, a soft pulse, repeating at precise intervals. Keanu leaned in. 3 beats, then 2, then 5. His jaw clenched. I've seen that pattern before, he muttered. Where? One of the agents asked. Keanu didn't answer right away. He turned, pulled out his phone and walked toward the far end of the room where the fluorescent lights didn't quite reach. He scrolled through a locked app, protected by layers of security that even the Bureau's systems couldn't match. A name blinked at him. Marcus J. Vale. Keanu tapped call. It rang once, then clicked. You told me I wouldn't call unless it was real, Keanu said. A deep voice on the other end replied. So? I take it it's real? Coordinates came from a signal sweep. Embedded in an espionage case I'm tracking. I need eyes, fast. Send them. Keanu forwarded the packet without another word. What am I looking at? Marcus asked after a few seconds. A return pattern, Keanu said. Same encryption you flagged outside Berlin 2 years ago. There was silence on the line. I remember that pattern, Marcus finally said. And I remember who used it. Keanu's voice dropped. Do you still have the old Pathfinder? Marcus let out a low breath. Still buried under my garage. I'll drive. Meet me in 2 hours. He hung up. Keanu turned to the lead agent. I'm stepping out. You have a 24-hour recess. I'll be back before the next session. The agent looked unsure. Shouldn't we? Keanu held up a hand. You already missed the device. You won't find where it came from without what I'm about to do. He walked out without another word. In the underground garage, Keanu slid into the driver's seat of an unmarked black SUV. Atlas leapt into the back seat with practiced ease, settling beside a canvas duffel filled with basic field gear. No small talk, no fanfare, just motion, a man and his dog. They were out of Washington, D.C. within the hour, heading south on I-95. The hum of the highway filled the silence. Keanu didn't turn on the radio. He didn't speak. His eyes stayed forward, mind focused on the fragment of code and the name that had surfaced alongside it. Black Lantern. It was once just a rumor. A ghost network, a backdoor channel used by rogue intelligence operatives to trade data for assets. Some said it was defunct. Others believed it never existed at all. But Keanu had seen glimpses of it. Bits of metadata buried in satellite caches. Strange delays in interagency pings. Odd payments traced back to nowhere. Now it had a name again, and Atlas had smelled its residue. By dusk, Keanu pulled off an unlit exit near Richmond, Virginia. A cracked county road led them deeper into farmland, acres of overgrown brush and abandoned equipment lining either side. At the end of the dirt path sat an old farmhouse, boarded windows, a caved-in porch, and a rusted pickup that hadn't moved in a decade. Marcus was already there. He stood beside a battered Jeep, flannel rolled to the elbows, ball cap low over his eyes. He didn't smile. "You sure it's this place?" Marcus asked. "Atlas is." The dog stepped from the SUV with no hesitation, his head swiveled, body tense, like a compass aligning to a field of unseen force. He moved ahead of them, sniffing the ground, the air, circling slowly, methodically. Then he stopped. His ears flattened. A deep, low growl rumbled from his chest. He was facing the old truck. Keanu didn't speak. He walked to the vehicle, circled the passenger side, and looked beneath. Nothing. Then he tapped the bed. Hollow. He glanced at Marcus. Underneath. Together they lifted the warped wood panel. Beneath it, bolted into the truck's chassis, was a steel compartment. Welded shut. Sealed like it hadn't been opened in years. Atlas sat down, eyes fixed on it, tail still. Marcus pulled out a cordless saw. "Stand back." It took 5 minutes to cut through. When the final edge cracked open, Keanu reached inside and pulled out a small, safe military-issue, reinforced steel, 6-digit lock. He set it on the ground. Atlas took one step forward and growled again, not in warning, in recognition. "Let's open it," Keanu said. They didn't need to guess the code. Marcus still remembered the key rotation from the Berlin site. He punched it in. 3, 2, 7, 9, 0, 1. A soft click. Inside were 4 items. A sealed envelope labeled Echo Ledger. 3 encrypted USBs in foam slots. A mini recorder with a worn casing. And a folded page with coordinates, typed, unsigned but marked with a strange insignia. Keanu held the paper up to the fading light. "This is it." "What's on those drives?" Marcus asked. Keanu slid one into his secured tablet, plugged in the decryption adapter, and watched as lines of audio files popped up, labeled only by date and code. Then he tapped play on the most recent file. Granger's voice echoed from the speaker, distorted but clear. "Prosecution believes they have nothing. Wallace is overconfident. The device is still transmitting. By this time tomorrow, the entire case will be dismantled." Keanu paused the audio. "That's dated 12 hours ago." Marcus whistled low. "He really thought he had you." Keanu looked at Atlas. The dog had settled again but remained alert. "Let's finish this," Keanu said. They copied the contents, sealed the drives, and buried the original safe beneath a pile of rusted parts. No fingerprints, no trail. As they drove back toward D.C., Keanu finally spoke. "This isn't just about one man. Black Lantern didn't die. It went to sleep, and someone just woke it up." Marcus looked at him. "And now?" Keanu didn't answer directly. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Atlas's golden eyes reflected back, steady, unblinking. "We go back, and we bring the truth with us." By dawn, they reached the courthouse. Keanu entered through the security checkpoint, USBs tucked in a locked case. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Justice Wallace was already waiting. "Did you find what you were looking for?" the judge asked. Keanu met his gaze. "No," he said calmly. "I found more than I wanted." The courtroom lights felt brighter that morning, as if the walls themselves anticipated the storm coming. Keanu entered without a word, the same way he always did, his black suit uncreased, his posture composed. Atlas padded beside him, silent but alert, like a shadow carved from discipline. But today was different. As Keanu approached the front row, Thomas Granger, who once sat smugly in his defense chair, shifted in his seat. His fingers twitched. His jaw locked tight. For the first time in the entire trial, Granger wasn't watching the prosecutors. He was watching Keanu. Judge Wallace, ever observant, noted the change. "The court will come to order," the bailiff announced. Prosecutor Maria Jennings stood with calm authority, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed the adrenaline she tried to hide. The courtroom was full, agents, press, and curious officials, all here for what they assumed would be a quiet final day of hearings. But Keanu knew better. He could feel it in Atlas's gait, the way the dog sniffed the air, slower today, more measured. Atlas had sensed something again. Keanu could read it in the subtle flex of the dog's muscles, the micropause before sitting down. Judge Wallace cleared his throat. "Before we resume, Mr. Reeves has been requested by the Department of Justice to remain in court as a silent security liaison due to his prior involvement in field detection and signal recovery. His service dog, Atlas, will remain under standard operational protocol." Thomas Reed, Granger's attorney, didn't argue, but his client did. "This is absurd," Granger muttered. "He's not even a government agent." Wallace glanced over. "Mr. Granger, if there's a problem, you may speak through your attorney. Otherwise, I suggest you stay seated and silent." Granger's mouth clamped shut. Maria Jennings walked to the center of the courtroom, a laptop in one hand and a sealed bag in the other. "Your Honor," she began, "we have recovered new evidence during the recess. Recovered from an off-grid site northeast of Richmond. It directly links the defendant to the unauthorized transfer of classified intelligence." Granger's eyes narrowed. "Keanu Reeves," Wallace said. "You were part of that recovery team. Would you confirm for the record your role?" Keanu stood. He didn't speak. Instead, he nodded, just once. Wallace understood. "Let the record show Mr. Reeves acknowledges participation in the secure extraction of digital evidence." As Maria connected her laptop to the courtroom monitor, Keanu reached down slowly and tapped the side of the bench. Barely noticeable. A rhythmic signal only Atlas would recognize. Atlas's ears lifted, his body coiled. He didn't bark. He didn't move yet. But every muscle in him shifted to high alert. His gaze locked not on the evidence, but on Granger. Granger saw it, and he panicked. Suddenly he stood, knocking over his chair. "This is a setup," he shouted, pointing at Atlas. "You're trying to frame me with a dog." Two guards moved in, but Atlas had already stood. Low, growl rising like thunder in a cavern. Keanu remained seated, calm as still water, but his eyes never left Granger. Granger stepped backward, stumbling over his briefcase. "I want a mistrial. He's got that mutt trained to attack me." Judge Wallace pounded the gavel. "Order in this court." But Atlas didn't lunge. Instead, he turned sharply and marched toward Granger's table. He sniffed once at the leg of the chair, then pressed his front paws forward, lowering his chest to the floor, tail rigid. Keanu rose. He walked over with slow, purposeful steps as the guards hesitated. Atlas remained frozen, his nose inches from the space beneath Granger's chair. A small red light flickered under the wood frame. Agent Caroline Dorsey, seated in the back row, stepped forward. She rushed over, crouched down, and retrieved a tiny device no bigger than a bottle cap. Still blinking. She stood and held it up. "It's active," she said, her voice cutting through the murmuring courtroom. "Signal's still live." Granger's face turned pale. The sweat that had been building now broke into rivers. Reed whispered furiously into his ear, but Granger no longer heard him. His eyes darted between the dog, Keanu, and the blinking device in the agent's hand. Wallace slammed his gavel again. "You have just confirmed everything," he growled. "Mr. Granger, you are now under federal indictment for obstruction and breach of courtroom security. Bailiffs, restrain the defendant and secure his belongings." Granger turned on Keanu. "You think this proves something? You think a dog's twitch means I'm guilty?" Keanu didn't answer. He didn't have to. Atlas sat beside him again, quiet and composed, the calm after the storm. As Granger was pulled from the courtroom, still yelling, the air hung heavy, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. Everyone remained seated. Even the reporters, with their notebooks ready, couldn't quite move yet. Wallace leaned forward and addressed the courtroom. "For those still unclear, let this serve as a reminder. Justice doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it waits." He turned to Keanu. "And sometimes it watches." Keanu nodded. Jennings continued her presentation, now uninterrupted. USB drives pulled from the farm safe revealed years of communication logs, alias records, and voice recordings detailing the full scope of Granger's betrayal. It was over, but it didn't feel like triumph. Not for Keanu. Outside the courthouse, as the media gathered to shout questions, Keanu simply exited through the side corridor. No statement, no photos. Atlas at his side, tail steady, tongue lolling now, as if the storm had passed. One reporter murmured, "That dog just broke open a federal case." But no one could catch them. Keanu didn't look back. In a quiet alley 2 blocks away, he stopped and knelt down beside Atlas. "You did good, buddy," he said softly. Atlas pressed his head into Keanu's shoulder. There were no medals, no speeches, just a man, a dog, and the truth they'd uncovered. Together. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours of the courtroom eruption, social media erupted with headlines that didn't need embellishment. Service dog exposes spy in courtroom. Keanu's silent signal cracks espionage case. The dog that stared down a traitor. Footage leaked from someone in the gallery, shaky but clear. It showed Keanu Reeves, silent and still, giving the most subtle of gestures. Atlas responding. Granger losing control. The second transmitter found. The judge's gavel crashing like thunder as chaos erupted. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. News anchors dissected it, analysts speculated, and the American public watched in awe. But while the media spun it into a sensation, Keanu quietly disappeared. He didn't give interviews, didn't tweet, didn't hold a press conference. Instead, he released a short statement through his foundation. "I trusted my partner. He did his job. I'm just proud to stand beside him." No mention of heroism, no mention of danger, just trust and a nod to the dog who changed everything. But the world wasn't about to let it end there. Within a day, Atlas's name was trending worldwide, not as a hashtag, but as a legend. Images of the Belgian Malinois, scar down his left shoulder, ears always alert, began appearing on t-shirts, murals, even children's sketchbooks. Kids across America wrote letters. Hand-drawn cards poured into the foundation's mailbox. Crayon-covered thank you notes from classrooms, Cub Scout troops, and military families. One letter in particular caught Keanu's attention. It was from a 9-year-old girl named Mia in Omaha, Nebraska. She wrote, in blue ink with carefully shaped letters, Dear Mr. Keanu and Atlas, I watched the video with my mommy. You didn't yell or fight, but you still won. I didn't know dogs could be heroes like that. I want to be brave like Atlas. Love, Mia. Keanu read it 3 times before quietly folding it and placing it in his coat pocket. He didn't show anyone. But later that evening, he sat beside Atlas on the back porch of his home in the hills outside Los Angeles, the letter still in hand. The sunset stretched orange across the sky, painting long shadows behind them. Atlas lay by his feet, his head resting on Keanu's boot, his breathing slow and steady. His work was done. That night, Keanu didn't say much, just reached down and scratched behind Atlas's ear. "You did good, buddy," he murmured. Veterans groups took notice too. Within days, Atlas was awarded an honorary citation by the National Veterans Canine Trust. The plaque was delivered by hand to Keanu's foundation office. He accepted it on behalf of Atlas and hung it in a quiet hallway. No press invited. Requests flooded in from morning shows, podcasts, and magazine covers. People wanted an exclusive. 60 Minutes offered a full segment. Keanu declined them all. He had no interest in becoming the face of a viral story. To him, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about something deeper. Truth, found in silence. Trust, earned in stillness. Still, the impact rippled far beyond the courthouse. Several government agencies quietly reached out to consult Keanu on nonverbal communication tactics with service animals. His method, long dismissed as too quiet for field work, was now being studied as a potential gold standard. He never boasted, he simply shared what he knew, when asked. And as for Atlas, he didn't crave attention either. Keanu kept him away from cameras, shielding him from the circus of media that now followed their every move. Atlas still lived the same routine: early morning runs, quiet evenings, and the occasional visit to the local veterans rehab center, where he'd rest his head on the lap of a wounded Marine or listen silently to a soldier still learning to speak again. But the world hadn't forgotten. Across the country, police departments, therapy groups, and canine training schools began renaming parts of their programs in Atlas's honor. There was now an Atlas protocol, used to train dogs in micro-response recognition, a Project Atlas initiative, to support dogs injured in duty. Even schools got involved. In Detroit, a second-grade teacher led her students in a classroom project, Be Brave Like Atlas. Each child shared a moment when they stayed calm under pressure, followed their instincts, or stood up for something without needing applause. Back at home, Keanu kept living quietly. He didn't look for the spotlight. Never had. But one evening, while volunteering at a children's music center he'd helped fund years before, something unexpected happened. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, walked up to him shyly. Her parents stood nearby, beaming. She reached out and touched Atlas's fur, then looked up at Keanu and asked, "Is he the one from the video?" Keanu gave her a soft nod. She blinked, then whispered, "He's not scary like my uncle said. He's strong." Keanu bent down beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Strong doesn't have to be scary," he said gently. "Sometimes, strong is just quiet." She smiled. Then, still petting Atlas, said, "I want to be strong like that too." And in that moment, Keanu realized something he hadn't fully understood before. The courtroom incident hadn't just exposed a traitor. It hadn't just proved a theory or stopped a leak. It had restored something, a belief that courage doesn't need to shout, that loyalty doesn't always wear a uniform, that some of the most powerful forces in the world, trust, integrity, restraint, are invisible until tested. And when tested, they don't flinch. So Keanu let the headlines fade, let the awards pile up in the background. He kept walking beside Atlas, his friend, his partner, his quiet shadow. The world could tell the story however it liked. But for Keanu, the only thing that mattered was that when it counted, Atlas didn't hesitate. And neither did he. By the time the sun rose over Washington, D.C. the next morning, The trial was no longer just a courtroom proceeding. It had become a national awakening. News anchors, political pundits, and late-night hosts were all talking about the same thing: the silent man and the scarred dog who uncovered a spy. Footage of Atlas growling, alert and focused, as Thomas Granger panicked in the courtroom, had flooded every platform. But what stunned America more wasn't the chaos. It was the discipline, the precision, the quiet. Atlas hadn't barked, he hadn't lunged. He had simply done his job, just as Keanu Reeves had trusted him to do. That morning, Keanu sat in his modest home outside the city. No camera crews, no press agents, just him and Atlas, now curled up by the fireplace. The leather collar worn loose around Atlas's neck bore one tag, a small steel plate etched with the word trust. While the world celebrated, Keanu stayed silent. He gave no interviews. When pressed for comment, his team released only one line: "I trusted my partner, he did his job." That sentence rippled louder than any speech. And yet the story didn't end with the conviction of Thomas Granger. The hard drive found in the Richmond farmhouse led to more discoveries: encrypted files, trail logs, and data points linking Granger to at least 3 other former intelligence officers now scattered across the country. It was a map of betrayal, meticulously hidden in code only people on the inside would recognize. Within days, the Department of Justice announced it was reopening 2 dormant cases involving suspected espionage in Texas and California. At the request of Justice Wallace, Keanu and Atlas were asked to assist, not as agents, not as witnesses, but as observers. Silently, they traveled from city to city. Keanu never wore a badge. He never demanded authority. He was simply there, present, still, unreadable. But Atlas always knew. He could sense tension before the room shifted, notice behavior even seasoned agents missed. In one instance, during a classified debriefing in Sacramento, Atlas stared down a civilian contractor and let out a quiet, restrained growl. Hours later, a background check revealed the contractor had recently taken a trip to Shanghai under a false name. By then, Congress could no longer ignore the impact. A bipartisan committee issued an official letter of recognition to Keanu and Atlas. Even critics who once scoffed at involving a civilian and a wounded detection dog in such high-level work were now praising their effectiveness. One senator from New York called them the quiet axis of trust this country didn't know it needed. But Keanu had no interest in headlines or commendations. Instead, he founded a private program, low profile, off the radar, dedicated to the rehabilitation of retired working dogs. Many, like Atlas, had been deemed too injured, too traumatized, or too unfit for further service. Keanu didn't see broken animals. He saw partners waiting to heal. He called the initiative Second Signal. The center was tucked in a quiet valley in West Virginia. Rolling hills, clean air, and acres of open space. Atlas became its first resident, not as a patient, but as a teacher. Veterans and first responders who suffered from PTSD began volunteering at the facility. Working with the dogs helped them reconnect with the world through silence, patience, and trust. Keanu didn't advertise the program. It didn't need marketing. The story carried itself. People from across the country wrote in with donations, many with notes attached. For the dog who showed us what loyalty really means. My brother served with a K9. He never recovered. Maybe now others can. Thank you for giving Atlas a second life, and for reminding us not to give up on ours. One day, as the leaves began to turn gold in late autumn, Keanu received a letter from a little girl in Michigan. The handwriting was crooked, the paper lined and stained with crayon marks. But the words stopped him cold. Dear Mr. Keanu, I saw your dog on the news. My dad says he's a hero, but I think he's more than that. I want to be brave like Atlas. My mom said when I'm scared at night, I should think of how Atlas stood up in that big courtroom, even though no one else knew what to do. Thank you for showing me brave doesn't have to be loud. Love, Emily, age 8. Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. Then, gently, he folded it and placed it inside a small notebook he'd recently reopened. His journal. He hadn't written in it since his wife passed away. That night, under the soft light of a flickering candle, Keanu wrote just 4 words. Atlas changed us both. In Washington, whispers began to circulate. A closed session of the National Security Subcommittee requested a private appearance from both Keanu and Atlas. At first, Keanu declined, but when he was told the purpose was to evaluate reform in how retired service animals are treated, he reconsidered. Not for glory, for the mission. On a rainy afternoon, Keanu entered the Capitol through the side door. No press, no limelight. Atlas walked beside him. Calm, focused, quiet. Inside the closed chamber, a congresswoman from Oregon stood and said, "I never thought I'd say this, but we're about to take testimony from a dog." The room chuckled softly, but Keanu didn't smile. He walked to the center of the chamber, knelt beside Atlas, and said one quiet word. "Show them." With that, Keanu tapped a familiar signal on the ground. Atlas stood, scanned the room, then sat perfectly still. Watching. Alert. Present. No bark, no tricks, just truth. One of the subcommittee members later said, "I've read thousands of pages of testimony in this room, but that moment said more than any of them." Keanu stayed only 20 minutes. He gave no long speech. Just a closing sentence. "You trained these dogs to serve. Let them keep serving, with dignity and purpose." As he left, the room rose, not in applause, but in silence. A show of respect, the kind Keanu understood. In the months that followed, Atlas became a symbol not of obedience, but of discernment. News programs told his story. Schools invited Keanu and Atlas for private visits, not for lectures, but for presence. Children would sit cross-legged in a circle while Keanu told them about trust, grief, and the importance of listening. One day, after such a visit, a teacher pulled Keanu aside. "Hemp doesn't speak often, does he?" she asked. "No," Keanu replied. "But when he does," the teacher paused, "people listen." The morning sky over Los Angeles was gray, soft light peeking through as fog hovered over the city. It was the kind of day most people overlooked, but Keanu Reeves never did. He walked the quiet path alone, a black messenger bag slung over one shoulder, Atlas by his side, alert but calm, his steps measured and precise. They were heading somewhere important, but not to a press event, a courtroom, or a studio. This time they were going to a place few knew about. The Braywood Institute for the Blind sat nestled between tall trees on the outskirts of the city. The building was modest. No news crews, no security gates, just worn bricks and the faint smell of chalk and old wood. The kind of place where truth lived quietly. Keanu had received a handwritten letter weeks earlier from a teacher named Miss Delaney. She'd shown her students the viral video of Keanu and Atlas in the courtroom, not for the headlines or the politics, but for what it meant to be brave without making noise. The kids had written back, each letter different, some in shaky penmanship, others in carefully pressed braille. But one stood out. A boy named Elijah had asked, "Why don't you talk much? Were you scared too?" That single question brought Keanu here. Inside, the hallway was lined with hand-painted murals and lockers with alphabet labels in braille. The moment they stepped in, a quiet hush passed through the few staff walking by. They knew who he was, but no one approached. No one needed to. Keanu followed Ms. Delaney down a small corridor where 6 children sat in a circle. They were waiting, not with fanfare, but a quiet kind of anticipation. Their eyes were closed. Some swayed slightly to the soft hum of piano music playing in the background. Others fidgeted with textured toys or leaned toward the sound of Atlas's soft steps. "This is Mr. Keanu," Ms. Delaney said gently. "And this is his dog, Atlas." The moment she said the name, heads turned, not from sight, but from memory. They had heard the clip, They had felt the tension in the way the world described it. Keanu didn't speak at first. He simply knelt beside Atlas and guided one of the boys, a young, curly-haired boy named James, toward the dog. "Can I?" the boy asked. Keanu nodded and whispered, "He's listening." James reached out, his small fingers finding the soft fur behind Atlas's ear. Atlas didn't move, except for the slow thump of his tail against the floor. Then the others joined. 6 pairs of hands, reaching toward the quiet protector they'd only known through sound and story. Keanu watched, letting them feel what he never could describe. No performance, no defense, just presence. A little girl, maybe 7, with short braids and a soft voice, leaned toward Keanu's shoulder and asked, "Why do you let the dog do the talking?" He smiled. Not the kind meant for cameras, but the kind built from 100 silent moments and losses he never shared publicly. "Because listening saved lives," he said softly. That answer, simple as it was, struck something deep. The room stayed still for a moment. The kids absorbed it, not as a clever quote, but as truth. Ms. Delaney motioned to a small upright piano in the corner. It looked old, the kind that had survived generations of tiny hands tapping out scales. Keanu walked to it slowly, pausing to let Atlas settle by his feet. The room grew even quieter. He ran his fingers along the keys, not to check their condition, but to remember what still lived in his own hands. Then he began to play. Not Rachmaninoff, not something showy, just a gentle melody, soft, warm. It sounded like a lullaby passed down without words, something that felt like memory, like comfort. It wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to soothe. The children leaned in, some with closed eyes, others gently moving their fingers to the rhythm they could only feel. The little girl who had asked about the dog whispered, "It feels like home." Keanu kept playing, his back slightly hunched, hair falling toward the keys. Atlas lay beside him, completely still. Every note Keanu struck wasn't for applause, it was for connection. For the children who couldn't see him, but could hear his soul. When the final chord faded into silence, Keanu sat still, hands hovering above the keys. No one clapped. No one cheered. But they didn't need to. "Thank you," Elijah finally said. "Now I know. You don't need to be loud to be strong." Keanu looked at him and nodded. Before they left, Ms. Delaney handed Keanu a folder of new letters, drawings, Braille messages. One girl had drawn Atlas with a cape, calling him the hero dog. Another boy had written, "When I grow up, I want to be quiet and brave too." Keanu didn't speak much after that. He just placed a hand on Ms. Delaney's shoulder and bowed his head. Then he reached down, gave Atlas one final scratch behind the ear, and walked out with him into the cool afternoon light. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees. Keanu paused under one of them and looked back at the school, still holding the letters. His expression unreadable, but his eyes filled with something only Atlas seemed to understand. No cameras, no headlines, no interviews. Just a man who had once lost his way, learning how to give back without speaking. And a dog who had once been discarded, now showing the world what silence could truly do. The federal trial that once gripped the nation had long since concluded. The courtroom was empty now. The cameras were gone. The headlines had faded into the endless cycle of louder stories, newer scandals, flashier outrage. But some moments, some truths, don't vanish with the spotlight. Keanu Reeves never spoke to the press. Not once. No post-trial interview, no public tour. He didn't bask in the praise or soak in the sudden rush of fame for exposing one of the most dangerous espionage plots in recent memory. He didn't have to, because the courtroom had already heard what mattered. And it wasn't from a microphone. It wasn't shouted across the aisle. It wasn't tweeted or televised. It was signaled with the quiet tap of his fingers and confirmed by the low growl of a wounded Belgian Malinois named Atlas. The world may not have been ready for what that silence meant, but it was listening now. Some people had questioned his presence in the courtroom that day. A Hollywood actor sitting silently in the front row of a national security trial? It sounded like a stunt, a distraction, a symbol at best. But what they didn't understand, what they never thought to ask, was why he was there in the first place. Keanu was invited not because of his fame, but because of what he'd done quietly years earlier. A covert operation gone sideways, an intel leak that nearly cost lives, and one man who stayed behind after extraction, refusing to leave until the last missing file was recovered. No cameras, no medals, just a file retrieved and a secret kept. That's how Atlas came into his life. A mission gone wrong, an explosion, a dog left behind, wounded and written off as no longer useful. But Keanu had seen something in him, something others missed. Instinct. Loyalty. The same fire the world rarely noticed until it was too late. He'd trained Atlas himself, not with rewards or commands barked out in drills, but with trust, with patience, with long nights of silence, watching how trauma settled in the body and how healing wasn't loud. It was slow, soft. That bond was why Atlas had recognized the danger before anyone else. The courtroom hadn't believed it at first. The prosecution's evidence was weak. The defendant, Thomas Granger, was calm, smug, dismissive. But when Keanu tapped that prearranged signal and Atlas rose like a shadow drawn to a scent, something changed. Granger panicked, the room felt it. And in that moment, it became clear. You don't always need proof in words. Sometimes, truth shows up with pointed ears and eyes that don't blink. In a world obsessed with shouting, with branding, with being louder than the next voice, Keanu never raised his. He didn't need to, because silence, when backed by truth, cuts deeper than noise. He let trust speak louder than accusation, let instinct guide him when evidence fell short, and he let a scarred dog who'd been discarded become the symbol of a nation's resilience. That story spread, not just because it was dramatic, but because it reminded people of something they'd forgotten, that the quiet ones are often the ones you should watch most closely. That in chaos, stillness isn't weakness, it's clarity. Veterans who once doubted the usefulness of therapy dogs wrote to Keanu. Teachers who never thought a courtroom could inspire hope played the story for their students. Families with nonverbal children said, "Now we understand. You don't have to speak to be understood." Atlas received hundreds of letters, some with drawings, some with nothing but a fingerprint and a thank you. One boy wrote, "I used to think heroes had to talk a lot. Now I know they don't have to say anything at all." Keanu read that letter twice. It reminded him of something his mother used to say, "Still waters aren't empty, they're deep." That lesson had carried him through more than just this case, through grief, through isolation, through the doubts of whether what he did behind the scenes ever really mattered. Now he knew, because in that courtroom, when the final transmitter was discovered and Granger's face drained of color and the gavel fell with that echo that shook the air, Keanu didn't smile. He didn't move. He just lowered his hand onto Atlas's back, and the dog laid his head down. Calm, complete, mission over. Justice Wallace, the presiding judge, later remarked, "It was the most powerful testimony I'd ever seen," and no one said a word. So here's the truth that lingers long after the headlines vanish. You don't need noise to make an impact. You don't need applause to know you were right. You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the most honest things in the world come in the quietest moments. A subtle gesture, a dog's low growl, the steady presence of someone who didn't come for credit. In an age of liars, spin, and distraction, be like Keanu. Be the still one in a room full of chaos. Be the quiet hand that catches what others miss. Trust your gut, or trust your dog, because sometimes The ones who never speak are the ones who see everything. If you believe silence can speak louder than words, drop 1 in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because some stories deserve to be heard, even if they're never shouted.